All right. Good evening. All right. So, stuff I forgot to include in my last video when I got sidetracked by trying to figure out how to work this shit. Um, yeah. So, more legitimate reasons. One, um, as I mentioned, regarding new vehicles, um, it's a cost of everything else. The cost of food. Which wasn't that Trump's main thing was to lower the cost of groceries, gas. Where's all that? What about the dose checks? Where's that? You know, just like every other politician or every other president. Let me rephrase that. They don't deliver on what they promise, and if they do, it's not generally for the good of the country. Whatever they do, it's not generally. Sure, some things are good, but not everything they want to do ends up being that good. Like, as mentioned with the cost of vehicles, this all really started, in the inflation of 2008. When Obama was in office, and the whole fucking cash for clunkers program that he had going on. Well, it started in 2008, um, and he was because Bush was president in 2008 up until 2009. Um, and that was when the recession initially happened. Obama was trying to do all sorts of different things, and maybe it was like some fresh blood ideas. But one of them was the cash for clunkers program. To try to get the economy going, try to get people to spend money. And unfortunately, what that led to is that led to the cost of everything vehicle-wise going up. And companies putting all this stuff that most people don't even really use in vehicles. I don't want to get into too much about that because I already covered that in my previous stream. So that was one thing. The cost went up. Cost of groceries has been steadily climbing. Now, in all fairness, while gas prices are up, they're not nearly as high as they were during the Bush administration. Younger Bush, that is. I mean, younger Bush? Yeah, we were paying like what, fucking almost $4 a fucking gallon? In some places even $5. So there's always, outliers that you see. But with that being said, the cost of, rent's gone up. Cost of a house has gone up. And the wages that go up just doesn't keep up with it, and also just makes the whole thing unsustainable. And that's why companies like Walmart, here it's called Giant. Up north where I'm from, it was called Stop and Shop. The same company, just a different name. The cost of groceries has gone up. The cost, energy, everything has gone up. And I think by raising minimum wage, is that going to offset it? No, because people at McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts or insert retail entry-level job of choice, they're still struggling. They're still living at home with mom and dad. They're not able to move out on their own. And part of that is because there's really no in between. There's live at home with your parents. Now you can rent a room. It's also what's going up. Or rent an apartment. Like, what is justifying the cost of fucking $2,000 a month, in rent for a fucking one bedroom? Or $1,300 for a fucking, basement room or a studio apartment. there's nothing that should really justify all that. But they want more money, so it kind of trickles down. And excise tax, or what they call here in Virginia, personal property tax. That also goes up, and it's through the fucking roof of the new vehicle because they base it off of the book value of the vehicle. Now I've had mine for 2 years. Knock on wood, I actually find some so I can keep it. But I've had mine for 2 years. It starts to trickle down and trickle down. Now, obviously, for a 35-year-old vehicle, you're not going to really get much excise tax from that, because they're just going to look at what they think it's worth, even though those have cult followings. But anyhow, enough of that. Medical care is another big one. That's the one that puts everybody into bankruptcy. And mind you, they have very limited power with how they can collect. Like, yeah, good luck with that. Like, where the fuck are people going to come up with that money? And that's why certain things, we need universal health care for. That's a reason for universal health care. Why should we, as supposedly the greatest nation, have to set up GoFundMes for medical care? I mean, fuck. We stereotype the Russian dolls on fucking dating apps and sites. As the one that begged for money for medical procedures. I've seen that too. And and obviously they have a different political system. Obviously not great with what's going on now, but that's beside the point. The point is they have universal health care. Canada has universal health care, although I think in Canada you still have to pay for prescriptions, which is another thing that ties into medical care. What is justifying the cost of a prescription drug? Now, I know Mr. Powell did mention, that Trump was doing a thing reducing the cost of prescription drugs. Saying, this is what you're going to charge. Fuck, and while he obviously does not like Trump, but even he said, he wants to see this happen. He wants to see what this will do, and where else can he take it to? Because nobody should fucking have to fucking choose between rent, groceries, or medicine. Nobody should have to choose from that. And again, like I said, we're probably the only nation in the world, or the only developed nation in the world, that people have to set up GoFundMes, cry on the internet for fucking medical care, and funeral costs. Like, what the fuck? Tell me you don't think that's fucked up. I mean, we're not the only country that has a privatized healthcare system. I'm sure other countries do, but I bet you anything that it's not nearly as expensive as it is here. Even a fucking ambulance ride, $1,500. And insurance doesn't even want to cover that. Which is another topic that's been covered by myself and many other people. Especially since the Luigi Mangione incident, where allegedly, shot Brian Thompson. Again, allegedly, because he's still a suspect at this point. But that kind of raises questions. Now, obviously, that incident realistically didn't accomplish anything. Other than making a fan club and, girls swooning over the, I'm going to say, alleged killer of Ryan Thompson. That's really, and one aspect, the left and the right had some common ground to agree on. And, I mean, even commenters, even YouTubers like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh were getting shat on by their own fans. This is not a left-right issue. This is a unified issue. And I mean, heck, I'll give Mr. Biden credit where credit is due during the campaign. Before he decided to step down, even he would say, we all have to unite as a nation, regardless of your political preference. Post Trump assassination attempt. And I know some people are going to say it's fake, whatever, um, but that's that. I'm not going to get into that. You know, what I am going to get into is, everything's set up to try to keep the common people down, and there's a lot more of us than there is of the rich, powerful elites, and they need us more than we need them. You know, do we really have to go to grocery stores? If we let the government go too far with it, they're almost going to make it so that people who hunt and farm can't. And then what? And then what? People who are vegan are no longer going to be vegan, because they're going to fucking make food ingredients. Like that one meme that went viral some years ago: Monsanto, food ingredients, none of your business. Are they going to make it so what they call ethical omnivore? That's another one. Their homestead is their farm, all that crap. Hunters. Are they going to make it so they can't do that, and that they also have to go to a grocery store? Because without farms, we have no food. And if you live in a city, obviously everything gets shipped here. Hawaii, everything gets shipped over there. Alaska, I'm not so sure about how they get like their veggies and their produce. But that again, that's a whole different atmosphere up there. You can't exactly farm it up there too good. You know what I'm saying? So they probably certainly live very, very differently than the rest of us in the lower 48. And again, Hawaii, I think I'd say just about everything is shipped to Hawaii. And we know the cost of living there is probably, expensive, because of stuff like that. Because there's not enough land to really, grow and farm stuff for the population that lives there. I mean, could they fish? That's a possibility. But anyhow, because they're still part of the U.S., is the government really going to try to overstep, on how people live their lives? I mean, it's crazy enough they want to keep tabs on us, through this medium, and they're probably watching me right now and everybody else. Everywhere I go with my phone, I'm being tracked. Hell, even when I step in my own car, I'm being tracked. Well, one, because I got a Connell, so yeah, they're definitely tracking my whereabouts like 24/7, 365. Just because it's a 2023. So yeah, again, the cost of stuff is just crazy. You can't find you can't find just basic anything, and a lot of it is because people don't want the basic anything. Now, obviously, some except food, you're gonna find your basic potatoes, you're gonna find your bag of rice, all that crap. That's always going to be there. Because there's some people who just like to make stuff from scratch. But again, how much is that big bag of rice going to cost? In the long run, and how long will it last? Even if you keep it in storage, because try to keep food in storage, other critters like to find it. So it's really a catch-22. Anyhow, moving on with taxes, like, do they really need to tax us that much? Like, where are our tax dollars going to? Are all of our tax dollars going to stuff that's going to benefit all of us? Or is it just going to fund wars that we really shouldn't even be involved in? Now, I'm hoping the Russia-Ukraine thing doesn't get to that point, where the whole world needs to be involved, because, again, that's just one of the things where that, in theory, one wrong move, could end up being World War III. And, it's just the nature of it. I know Tom Powell mentioned this in some of his videos, the 100-year cycle, 1812, there was a War of 1812, the Overture. Not sure what other types of wars happened, but, obviously the Civil War, that was a big one. 20th century, World War I, World War II. The last two wars where it was really necessary for, the U.S. to get involved. And, hell, we were the last one to actually get involved. At least in World War II. I'm not sure about World War I. Don't quote me on that one. And now, according to him, I hope he's wrong, but he could be right. It's 2025. 2022 was like the real start of the Russia-Ukraine, invasion. We all know who started that war. Now, again, I'm not saying, Zelensky's a saint or anything, but, why would a smaller nation try to invade a bigger nation? That, make it make sense. Obviously, Germany wanted to, whiten all the nations around it and slowly take over, in Japan. And that was kind of, that was kind of probably like the same thing, They both hated the U.S. And, I think the only reason that, the Soviet Union sided with us is because they hated the Germans a little bit more, So that could have turned out to be that could have turned out way differently. But yeah, I think, everything I've discussed in these two videos are probably some real legitimate reasons, to just say, fuck it, jump ship, fucking, find a place where you're going to find peace. Don't try to find some country where you think you're going to, get a piece of tail if you're a passport bro. But yeah, and it would not surprise me if you start seeing a lot of expats. Anyhow, I'll talk to you.